Back here now to the border with Turkey and Syria. I'm joined now by Murat Aslan, an analyst and expert on this situation, executive, from the Kalyoncu University. Thank you very much. It took me a while to get it up there. First of all, your reaction now that the operation is fully launched, and what are the initial stages that will be taking place, do you think?
Actually, the operation had started before. And right after the attack to Turkish soldiers, as you know, Turkey just intensified the attacks targeting regime forces. But today we have learned that there is a name attack of that operation, and that's for sure. It's a kind of manifesto of what type of operation it is and what the limits are in terms of engaging with Russians or not, for instance, or just targeting regime targets in accordance with the desired outcomes of the overall operation.
And of course the overall outcome is to push those regime forces back to that de-escalation line. The first stages though will be the fighting for control of the region, and the fighting over there is as fierce as it's been for quite a while.
Actually, the announced ultimate target currently is very clear in the announcement of the Minister of Defense, Akar. They want regime forces to withdraw back to the Sochi line, and by that way they can go back to the Sochi agreement. That's the ultimate goal. But if there is no consent with this ultimate goal, then Turkey will review the targets and continue to do something else just to ensure that the soldiers are in safe, and also humanitarian disasters could be prevented as a result of such kind of campaign on the ground.
Because it's of course double-edged, as you rightly mentioned. There is a military capacity to this, but there is also the main basis of this is that there are millions of people, millions of civilians there trapped among these warring forces, and the efforts to try and bring peace to that region, or at least de-escalate that region, because as we know the war has been raging for years, is very, very difficult.
In terms of humanitarian disaster, we have to focus on many different aspects of the problem. The first issue is direct security of these individuals. They are waiting just very close to the border. They need humanitarian aid. And on the other hand, there are risks. Just imagine what happens if coronavirus, for instance, spread to the refugees. That means it's a disaster over there that we cannot control, we cannot contain. Then a military operation along with measures adequate to respond to the risks, just because these individuals are going to experience in the coming days, actually.
Absolutely. Murat, just stay with us, because I do want to bring in our correspondent, Abaida Hito. Abaida has been covering this war in all aspects for years, and he is now in Idlib city, of course, as Operation Spring Shield begins properly in earnest. Abaida, tell us what the situation is where you are, please.
Well, Operation Spring Shield has started with a bang here in Idlib. This afternoon, we're getting reports of multiple regime aircraft being shot down. Right now, we know for sure there's at least one aircraft that was shot down. The opposition forces here say that a Turkish F-16 fighter jet actually got into a dogfight with this Sukhoi 24 fighter jet and shot it down. There is another jet that was shot at, and it was basically flying and went back into regime territory. There's a third jet that we're getting reports of being shot down as well. We're waiting for confirmation about the third jet. There is a sense of joy here in Idlib and around Idlib. On our way here, we saw people actually carrying Turkish flags and celebrating the Turkish intervention here. The Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar, he said that Turkey is here to defend the innocent civilians that are being attacked by the Assad regime, to prevent migration and to prevent extremism from spreading. And the Turkish military actually has begun this operation since the 27th of February. That was the night that a Turkish convoy was hit in Idlib province. 33 Turkish soldiers were martyred in that operation, and the defense minister says that that blood will not be forgotten. There are ongoing clashes between opposition and regime forces on multiple multiple fronts in and around Idlib province. In the Jebel al-Zawi region, opposition forces have taken at least 7 villages back from regime control over the last 48 hours. In Saraqib, opposition forces are also stopping regime attempts to come back into the region and are going forward with clearing the area from regime elements. In western Aleppo, there is also opposition bombardment onto regime positions. There is also a very significant increase in aerial activity. Earlier, there was actually the sound of anti-aircraft machine gun fire towards the jets that were flying. At one point, there were 6 jets flying around in the air. Now, some of them have been shot down, so there aren't 6 anymore. The situation here is definitely escalating as Turkey announced its operation here in Idlib province. It's not clear exactly what the operation is going to look like going forward, but what we do know is that Turkey has targeted multiple regime positions over the last 72 hours. They've destroyed over 100 tanks, they've destroyed over 70 rocket launchers and different other kinds of mortar and artillery equipment. They've also destroyed a drone, 8 regime helicopters, and killed over, or neutralized, I should say, over 2,000 regime soldiers. And that is in response to the regime attack on Turkish soldiers that martyred 33 of them and injured 36 others. The situation here, as I said, is quite violent. However, people here are very excited that Turkey is now going to continue to carry out operations and has started Operation Spring Shield here in northern Syria.
And Abaida, as you mentioned, a heavy toll being paid to the Syrian regime forces and their proxy units. But I want to get a sense from you about the civilians. You said you drove into Idlib city. We were talking about this yesterday, about just sort of deserted towns. Did you see many civilians as you were driving in? And if you did, what kind of condition were they in?
Well, this is Idlib city center where we stand, and you can see there's a lot of activity here. There are still some families here. There are still some young children, women. People don't have anywhere else to go. Idlib city has been attacked in the last 10 days by the Assad regime. The problem is that people don't have any other option. If they leave Idlib city, if they leave their homes here, even if they're rented homes and they've been displaced from other places, the only place they can go is north towards the Turkish border. Moving their families towards the Turkish border is expensive and costly. Finding a different place to stay near the Turkish border is expensive and costly. And many of these people have large families, so it's very difficult to move from place to place, especially in a war zone like Idlib. The people that we're talking to, though, are very optimistic about the Turkish intervention and the launching of Operation Spring Shield. And they say they hope that the areas that were taken from them over the last several months will be returned, and possibly even more.
Absolutely. And Abaida, how many areas do you figure at the moment have actually been liberated back from the Syrian army at this point?
So since the Syrian regime advanced into northern Syria several weeks ago, opposition forces launched several counteroffensives. One counteroffensive was in Saraqib. Opposition forces entered the town of Saraqib, as well as a dozen or so villages and towns around Saraqib. Saraqib is a very strategic town that sits on the M4-M5 highway junction. These are the 2 main highways that run north and south through Syria and east and west through Syria. And they both meet in Saraqib before they head towards Aleppo and the Iraqi border. Opposition forces are now in control of the town of Saraqib, as well as towns and villages around it. They've also launched a counteroffensive in the Jebel al-Zawi region. Over the last 48 hours, they've managed to take back at least 7 villages in the Jebel al-Zawi region. Even though in terms of square meters, this territory is quite small, it is making a dent into the areas that the regime forces took over the last few months. The regime managed to take more than 2,000 square kilometers of territory from opposition forces, including critical areas like western rural Aleppo, southern rural Aleppo, Ma'arat al-Nu'man, Khan Sheikhoun. These are all areas where opposition forces were in very large numbers and in a very strong position up until several weeks ago. Since then, regime forces advanced to the north following the M5 highway, reaching the town of Sarakib. As I mentioned, opposition forces have launched several counteroffensive and taken back several areas, including on the Sarakib front and then in the Jabal al-Zawi region. And we are here in Idlib city, and the people here, including young men who are part of the opposition forces, say that operations are going to continue. Today, they expect new operations to be launched in rural Aleppo, in Jabal al-Zawiya, and around the M5 highway. And they say they're not going to stop until they take all of this territory back from regime forces.
Okay, Abaida Hitto there for us live in Idlib city. Abaida, do stay safe, and we'll be back with you later on in the day. Let's bring back Professor Murat Aslan again. And Murat, Abaida was mentioning there, this is such a fluid fight. Towns are taken, lost, retaken again. But now that might change, now that there is a significant Turkish force moving with these fighters.
Well, still the picture is blurry. I think Turkish army is in a phase of, converting the strategy, heading to the diplomatic and political developments. And we have focused on what will happen during the meeting between Putin and Erdogan. But up until then, Turkey will continue, I believe, or I assess, to hit regime targets by means of either armed UAVs or air forces, and maybe support Syrian National Army on the ground. But it is a kind of time-consuming and also a blurring issue, because Syrian army does the same. They are targeting Syrian National Army or Turkish army. So there may be some, go and backs during that time period. But when the Turkish ground forces are put into force, depending to the diplomatic, undertakings, I think everything will change, or we may see some new challenges.
Absolutely. Okay, Murat Aslan, I'm going to have to let you go because I know you have other commitments today, but thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for that analysis. Okay, as we continue on TRT World, our rolling coverage.